Dive, dive, dive. Hello and welcome to the Submarine Sea Stories Podcast, where you will hear those stories locked away in the darkest reaches of a bubble-headed mind. And now, plank owner, Blue Nose, Cold War veteran, and your host, Bill Nowicki.
I got Dave Bowman with me. You might remember him in Submarine Sea Stories from 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago when I first interviewed him. He was on submarines and did some interesting things, had a interesting story, and it's been 10 years. So how's it been? How's it been the last 10 years there, Dave?
Not nearly as interesting.
No, yeah. I know. We pegged, we peaked early in our lives.
Yeah, we got all the good stuff out of the way.
Yeah.
I tell people that all the time. When you're 23 years old and you're the battle station's missile supervisor in charge of 24 possibly nuclear-armed missiles, where do you go from there?
Yeah, you got a lot of power in your hands. Yeah, you give it up after a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, to get people back into your story, you grew up in a landlocked area of the country, but somehow you ended up in submarines.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, you ended up in Utah, if I'm correct,
I did.
Right?
Yeah, I did. My parents were Salvation Army officers, and I had grown up in Colorado. I'm originally from Oklahoma, but we grew up in Colorado, and my junior year in high school, my parents got moved to Ogden, Utah. And it was in Ogden, Utah, where I enlisted in the Navy, skipped school the day of graduation to go enlist. And the submarine thing is actually, I have a passion for history. I have a passion for naval history. And I had read Clay Blair's book, Silent Victory, in high school. And I just fell in love with submarines. I'd never even seen one. And when the guy said, "Do you want to volunteer for submarines?" I said, "Sure." And that's how I ended up with submarines.
Now, it's funny. I didn't know they were Salvation Army officers. I worked at a Salvation Army camp and had to work for officers, majors, and all that stuff. Tell folks how the Salvation Army is like the military.
Yeah, they use military ranks. The Salvation Army is a church. Most people don't know that. They think of it as a social services agency. But it is a church that uses military-style rankings and conversations. The reason for that goes back to the 1860s, when militarism was very in vogue around the Civil War, and in Victorian England, which is where the Salvation Army comes from. And General William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, was very militant about things. And so it carried over. My father was a major when he retired, and he has since passed on. But yeah, it is a church. I grew up in it. I was actually a fourth generation member of the Salvation Army. So all the way back to my great grandparents before I left it in the early 2000s.
Wow. And I remember correctly, are you Jewish?
I am. I fully converted to Judaism in 2000, and officially 2008 was the official conversion date. But
now,
yes.
Why did you decide to do that?
Oh, good Lord. How long do you have?
Yeah. Probably tough.
At the end of the day, I needed a faith that actually practiced what I believe. And while I have a great deal of passion and appreciation for the Salvation Army and a great deal of love for that organization, it's not what I came to believe, doctrinally speaking. I had to find something that was closer to what I believe, what I practice, and Judaism was it. And it was not an easy process. It was a good 20-year process.
Yeah.
One of the things in Judaism is that they do not encourage converts. In fact,
right.
You have to fight to convert. The first thing you tell your rabbi that you're going to convert, the first thing he'll say is, "No, you're not." And that's the beginning of the argument. And it took a good 20 years before.
Well, it sounds like you didn't shy away from difficult things in your career, and you ended up on submarines. Like you said, you led that crew, the missile crew. Tell me about your transition, because obviously you're a well-read guy, you love books, What was it like when you entered the Navy?
It was an adventure. It really was. I enlisted when I was 17. My parents went ahead and signed off on it because they knew that if they didn't sign off on it, I was just going to wait till I was 18 and leave anyway. It was an eye-opening adventure in a lot of ways. I was a very sheltered child. I grew up, like I said, in a very conservative Christian household. And then you add in that being in Utah, which is a very conservative place anyway. I thrived at it. I had my issues. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was the sailor of the year because I wasn't. But I learned a lot of things, and I learned I grew up. And I say this, and of course, no disrespect for my father. That's not what I'm saying here. But I had a lot of chiefs and master chiefs that really became my fathers and in a lot of ways. And it was a growing experience, and it was one that I treasure deeply and really regret giving up. That was a huge mistake. But I have the chance now with sub-vets and the sub-vet page and that kind of stuff to recapture some of that.
Yeah. So tell me about some of these mentors you had and how they brought you up to speed, knowing that you came from such a background with a very narrow focus. Now you're being exposed to all these new and different sounds, words, smells.
After basic training, smells. After basic training, after A school, after C school. So when your Navy career really actually starts, I was sent as a plowback, which is a billet that they don't have room for you anymore on the boat. So I was sent as a plowback to Trident Training Facility here in Bangor. I was sent to the data center to work on what was then the DEC 1170 mainframe computer. I still love that machine. I really do. But it really had nothing to do with what I was supposed to be doing. And I'm a fire control technician, and here I am doing transfers and setting up people's accounts and basically being an admin. Had a senior chief there had a senior chief who was just a genius, Ken Kirkpatrick, when it came to programming. This was 1982. And this guy knew everything there was to know about programming then. And we had a boss, a master chief, and I'm not going to name because it's not really fair to him, who was not up to speed on those kinds of things and was really a great example of how not to be a leader in any situation. And for whatever reason, he just had it in for me. I don't know. Bill, you'll understand this, and some of your listeners will understand this, but when he wrote my evals for my transfer, which would come eventually, he told me to my face that this was an above average evaluation for a brand new third class. 2830.
Wow.
Okay. I didn't know any better. But Ken Kirkpatrick took me under his wing, and he had a sailboat, and he would take me out sailing here on the Puget Sound, and we'd have long conversations about what it meant to be. He was actually an ET, a Nav ET, but we had a lot of long conversations, and that'll actually come back into the story a little bit later. Following him on the boat, I had Master Chief Joe Adamson, Joe was, I don't even know how to describe Joe. I looked at Joe smoked a pipe. He had gray hair. He had high blood pressure. I thought that Joe was about 70 years old. And it turned out, I didn't learn this till later, but it turned out Joe was 33. He was not old, but he really took me under his tutelage. There was a day when I fouled up really bad. I unintentionally went AWOL. I didn't know I had gone at UA. I had no idea, but I did. And I still remember sitting with him on the bollards overlooking the dry dock at Delta Pier. And basically it was a come to Moses meeting. It really was. And it was a turning point. It really changed my life. And Joe was one of those guys that if Joe had asked me, if he'd have come into me and said, Dave, tomorrow morning, we're doing a special evolution and I need you to be able to walk on water, I would have been up all night practicing walking on water because I didn't want to let him down. And it was that kind of relationship. Mitch was not a chief. He was a second class. He was my sea daddy. Mitch was very influential in my life. And I say this because it's an example of how different the Navy was for me as I grew up. Mitch was not, I'll just say it, Mitch was gay in the 1980s. Mitch was gay and nobody cared, but he wasn't hiding it either. And even to this day, Mitch is still one of the most influential people in my life. And it was fascinating because here I am, this straight conservative young guy, and here's Mitch, who's a little more wild and stuff. But he taught me everything I knew about fire control because I sure didn't learn it in school. But there you go. So jump forward, life goes on. I get out of the Navy, I get out of the ministry, I get into radio, and I re-meet a girl that I had met when I was up here the first time around through the Salvation Army. And we had both been through experiences with marriage and that sort of thing. And so I ended up dating her again, and we ended up getting married. But I had never met her parents. Okay. So the night before our wedding in 2009, we're down in Tacoma at the place where the lakeside house where we're getting married. And I'm standing on the balcony and her dad is there. And I happen to know that her dad is retired Navy. He's a retired warrant officer. And I find out that he's also a retired senior chief petty officer. So he made warrant on and then changed out.
Yeah.
And on the Nathaniel Green, the nasty Nat, is that what they call her? And so just as a joke, I said to him, hey, can I have your permission to marry your daughter? And he started laughing. And we got to talking. And it turns out that he went to the same Swazier school I did in Dam Neck. Did the same, he went to Navy TC school while I went to Fire Control C school. And so we basically had the same career. He was on one boat and wound up on two tenders because he had a huge family and like I said. But what I discover is that his best friend, when he was a third class petty officer, ET, went to school with, was Ken Kirkpatrick. My first real senior chief had been his best friend. And now here I am standing here marrying his daughter. And it was just this big circular thing. I look at, I never made chief. I did make first class primarily through sorcery and simony, but I never even was eligible for first class before I got out. Chief before I got out. But I look at those guys as some of them were really influential and still are. I still think to myself, what would Joe tell me to do if I was in this? And unfortunately, he's passed away, and so has my father-in-law. And I haven't heard, I'm assuming Ken has, honor those guys and honor those memories because they're not going to be there forever.
Now, did you get a chance to tell them how influential they were for you?
My father-in-law, to a degree, we talked about Ken. Never saw Ken again after I went to the boat. Joe, unfortunately, the 80s was before the internet. The internet really comes into being in the 1990s. Nobody really puts Facebook or what do we have before that? MySpace. Retired Master Chiefs are not going to be on MySpace. So by the time Facebook rolls around in 2008, 2009, we're really just starting to get to the internet. And one of the first things I find as I'm searching the internet is Joe's obituary. He passed away at the age of 61. And I think to myself, that's not going to happen. Mitch, I tell all the time because he just lives down the street, so he knows.
Yeah. What about, you talked about your transition in the military and being surrounded by people and having to learn all these things, but you said you didn't quite fit in. What was it about your personality? Were you pushing back on things? Did you think you knew better? What was it?
There were times when it was both and times when it was neither. I think the biggest, for me, difference was that I'm a very suspicious person to start with. And I'm also a very sarcastic person, as if you hang around, you'll find out. So I was never that guy that was falling for the stupid jokes. I never would say, I'll go get the relative bearing grease, and I would tell them no in so many words. I never did that. I think there was this element of, I wasn't religious in the strictest of senses back then. I still went to church. I still was involved with the Salvation Army units where I was. I didn't drink back then. And I don't now again, but for an entirely different reason.
Yeah.
But you set yourself apart in some ways. But at the same time, I also felt like I was as much a part of it as anybody. As a second class petty officer, I'm a battle station missile supervisor. I'm MWR chairman. I helped with the reunion a couple of years ago. I was the MC for that. There are I think I'm just different. I don't know that I never totally fit in, but I fit in a different way in the sense that I love having fun. I love laughing. And believe me, I did a lot of laughing on the submarine, but I also did a lot of complaining because everybody does. And I hated shore duty. I want to be clear about that. I
Really?
hated shore duty, yes.
Really?
Yeah, I had orders in my hand. In 87, I was supposed to go to Scotland to the tender over there. And unfortunately, by the time I got through the sea school, which was a Poseidon sea school, I backfit to Poseidon. By the time I got through sea school, there were a lot of changes politically in the world, one of which was the Poseidon boats were basically decommissioned. And there's really no reason for me to go to Scotland. And so I explained to the detail, send me to new construction in New London. I'm already tried and qualified and I'm good to go. And his reaction at the time was, no, you're going to Scotland. And so in one of my obstinate phases, I refused to sign the sea time extension, which I would have needed to go. And so he said, fine, in so many words, and said, you can be an instructor in Dam Neck. And I, who have never seen a 616 class, a 630, never even seen one of those submarines, those 640 class submarines, the Poseidon boats.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the show. This is Bill Nowicki saying, please tell a couple friends about my new show, the Nuclear Leader Podcast. It's at nuclearleader.com. You can get it anywhere that you get your podcasts. It's all about leadership in the commercial nuclear industry. I've been working in since 1991 when I got out of my university studies at Virginia Tech and after my submarine stint. But I'd love for you to listen, tell a couple friends about the show, get the word out. It really supports leadership in the nuclear industry, the industry I've grown to love, and I think you'll love it too. And you can hear from Lori Brady, who's at the Nuclear Energy Institute, some folks at Palisades on how they're trying to start up that unit. Ingemar Engstfist, who is the former CEO of WANO, the World Association of Nuclear Operators. And there's a bunch of more where that came from. So please check out the Nuclear Leader Podcast. And this is Bill Nowicki. Back to the show.
Never seen one. I ended up teaching Poseidon fire control for 4 years in Dam Neck. Now, I'm not going to tell you I wasn't good at it because I was, but at the same time, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. And it was just typical of the Navy at that point was we're going to get our way, even if it doesn't make sense, just to make our point.
Yeah. And they did have a lot of control, that's for sure. It sounds like now your life has come full circle in some sense, and you're very active. You were talking about some of the organizations you work with. Why is it? Why have you come back home in a sense?
It goes back to that love of history. It really does. In 2016, I was still in Manteca, California, and I joined SubVets, United States Submarine Veterans, just something I had been intending to do for a long time, but I just hadn't because there was no base around there. But I just decided to go and join as a member at large. And so I called the office and joined. And then a year later, we moved to back to the Bremerton area, Silverdale, which is where I was stationed when I met my wife. All our kids and grandkids were up here at the time. They're not now. So that's another story.
Happens, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, when I got here, I was sitting with my son at the McDonald's, had my Michigan hat on, and some guy walks up and says, "Are you coming to the base meeting?" It was like, I don't know anything about the base meeting. And the next thing I know, I'm at the base meeting. So I start going to these subvet meetings, and what I'm discovering is, from a historian standpoint, these things are a gold mine. Just sitting around the tables talking to people is incredible. The stories you're getting, the humor that you're getting, the camaraderie that you're getting, the fellowship that you used to have on the boat, but you don't have now. It's back again, at least for a couple hours, once or twice a month. So after about a year of this, the outgoing base commander is talking about, we got elections next year, need people to step up and start taking on jobs. And so we went and sat down for a cup of coffee, and I said, okay, I'm willing to help. I'm good with typing and that, because be a good secretary. I'm an accountant. I could be a good treasurer. I'm willing to do any of those kind of things. And he looks at me across this table with an absolutely straight face, Bill, and says, why not base commander? And I choked on my coffee a little bit and said, number one, I've only been here a year. He says, so what? I'm still going to be here. The previous base commanders will be here. What the heck? So I became the base commander of the Bremerton base in January of 2020 and immediately shut everything down for COVID and spent the next 2 years not doing anything. Which is when I invented that's when Zoom really became a thing. So I invented the Zoom meeting and we were doing things online and all kinds of stuff. And then when it reopened up, it was still slow. Everything wasn't back up to speed. And by the time everything got back up to speed, my term was over. And now I'm the past commander, but I am the base historian. I keep very active. I have a base historian website. I'm also the base webmaster. We're actually doing training right now for our base members to teach them how to use the websites and how to blog and how to create this information, because the stuff has got to be stored, and it's the 21st century. We can't do it on cassette tapes and VHS tapes anymore. It's got to be digitalized.
Yeah.
So we're headed in that direction. But for me, that hour, 2 hours every month on a Saturday, it's incredible. You sit there. We had a member, he's since passed on, Wayne Sikowski, who was the cob for the Queenfish back in the 80s. And just sitting at the table talking to him about just listening to his stories. As a third, second, even into a first class, you have a certain vision of how things are done in management on the submarine. And what you discover sitting there talking to Wayne is that they don't know what they're doing either. They just have this policy of pretend like you know what you're doing and act big. That way everybody will play along with you. And it was funny. And his whole story about stealing a car to go get a haircut, because his haircut was unsat. So he steals a car to go get a haircut. I'm like, okay. It was a different time.
That's crazy. Yeah, what was it? What would you say, hearing those stories during the Cold War that we were active? How would you tell people in historical context how important that time was in our country's history?
Wow. It's hard to explain to people, because when I say Cold War to someone who's, let's say 20, 25 now, in their heads, they're going to 1968, 1966, the thermonuclear war. Nuclear war is bad for children and other people, and love, peace, and hippies and that sort of thing. And it's, for us in the 80s, that's not what it was. And it's hard to explain to them. But if you think about this, Bill, and you and I are about the same age, when we were kids, the World War II veteran was us. And now we're the veteran. The World War II guys are all but gone. The Vietnam guys are getting into their 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
We are
crazy.
We are just like that generation when we were growing up. And there's a story to be told, and I think it's easier to tell the World War II stories. It really is. There's so much information and so much, even with that, there's a lot of digging. I'm going to tell a story tomorrow on my website about that. That's just an incredible story. But for us, it's harder because we can't still talk about the things. Our boats are gone in most cases. And we're still operating under those non-disclosure agreements that we're not supposed to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
You post a story on the Subvet about the book, Blind Man's Bluff, and just watch the reaction you get from the people who are like, you can't talk about this. That never happened. It's complete myth. It's not. I still have in place. It's strange to me that I still have in place a thing that I signed when I got out of the Navy. Can't go to a communist or form in a communist country. Okay, so if I apply for a passport to go visit Moldova, what's the government going to say? And my technical knowledge, the systems that I was trained on haven't existed. They're gone. They haven't even existed for a generation. How do you tell that story to someone? How do I tell that, why that Cold War, that later era of the Cold War matters? And it's hard to do sometimes, and it's hard to do because information is much more restricted. People to this day are still not sure what they can or can't say. Steve Brock, who's a sub vet over on the South Carolina side, wrote a book, Bubblehead's the book, it's a fictional book, but it's based on his life aboard Lapon, which is another interesting story because his captain on Lapon was my captain on Michigan later. And we have completely polar opposite views of this guy. He loves him. I wasn't impressed with him, but he wrote this book. And one of the things he talks about is how he wasn't sure he could publish this book because is this classified? Is it not classified? And he says we were at the Lapon sail dedication because the Lapon's been decommissioned and cut up, but they went to the sail dedication and he met the captain there. And he asked him, like he would know, can I?
Right, yeah.
And the captain said, as far as I know, it's all declassified. I don't know. So he went out and published it. I've got 3 copies of it sitting over there. So.
That's funny. Yeah, but back to the question. So in context, we can't talk about it. I felt like we were doing something very important, and it really supported our overall goal, which is to eliminate Soviet threats, I guess.
On the one hand, I tell people that all the time. We won the Cold War. We did. What we were doing caused the Soviet Union as a nation to crumble because they couldn't keep up. And the harder they tried to keep up, the more they spent themselves into oblivion. So from a geopolitical viewpoint, there's that. But did we? Here we are 2 generations later, 40 years later, and we're looking at the same existential threats, the same political theories are coming back. For God's sakes, here in Seattle, we've got literal communists running for office. Yeah. How does that happen? Did I really win the Cold War? Because now people in my own country espousing this. That's what I struggle with when it comes to contextually teaching this stuff. One of my classes last year in college I finally went back to college, talking about the instructor was saying some things about the Cold War. And I was like, you want the opinion of somebody who was actually there? Because what you're saying is, number one, it's banal, but number 2, it's wrong. Yeah. You don't know what happened. You're 30 years old. You weren't there. You don't know.
Yeah.
And that's, boy, how do you explain to people that what happened? And I haven't found that answer yet, Bill. It's a heck of a lot easier for me to tell World War II stories and even general stories than it is to tell a Cold War story because I don't know how to do it.
Yeah. And going back to what you were talking about earlier is that connection you still have with your shipmates on that base, being the base commander and all that for the, what's it called? U.S.
United
States
Submarine Veterans.
Yeah. That feeling that you get being around those people, there it is. The feeling you get around those people and around that, you don't have to do a bunch of intro. People know you, and that feeling, what feeling does that bring up for you?
It's a great feeling. It's a feeling of almost being home in some ways. One of the things I do talk about often is in 2018, we did a ship's reunion here for Michigan, for the 80s crew, pre-common 80s crew. And one of the things I noticed was when we had a pre-thing over one of our shipmates at the time, who has since passed on, owned a bar here. And we all went to the bar the night before. And it was literally, Bill, sitting at the table with people that I had sat with 35, 40 years before, and we had just gotten off watch. And the conversation just picked up. Like you said, no introductions. No, it was like we had just gotten off watch, and it was that same feeling. And I get that same feeling on the 3rd Saturday of each month when I go, because even though Harold was on the Scorpion and I was on the Michigan, and that guy over there was on the Cusk, a diesel boat, John, and we got people that were on the newer boats, there's still that same connection, that same feeling, that same experience that enables you to not have to feel like you got to lead with your resume like you do sometimes when you're out in the civilian world. Hey, do you know who and what I am? Do you know what I've done? No, I don't have to do. And I don't care talking to somebody who was a helmsman, plainsman for his entire career, or a woman now who was a chief of the boat. We've got both. And it's an incredible feeling of comfort that I can't get anywhere else.
Yeah. Funny, I think back to one of the interviews I did, and the guy came from a very chaotic family. His parents were alcoholics, so when he came through the door in high school, he didn't know if they were going to be everybody was cool or somebody had been drinking, and he said, "I never slept better than I did when I was on that submarine."
I would tell you the same thing at
crazy.
the risk of making my wife a little. I don't think I ever slept better than when I was on the boat. I'll tell you this, until I married my current wife in 2009, I never ate better than I did on the boat. And that includes holiday. I'd go out of my way to eat holidays on the boat because they were really good.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah. Tell people how they can get interested or how they can stay in contact with you. You have that history podcast and some other things. What are you up to?
I do 3 podcasts officially on a weekly basis. Dave Does History, which is pretty easy. DaveDoesHistory.org, one big word. I also do a radio show weekly in Melbourne, Florida. Which is
other end of the country.
Yeah, but it's the 21st century now. And
right, yeah.
Just like we're connected, because you're in, I don't even know where you are, but
Marietta, Georgia.
Marietta, Georgia. That's right. Spent a lot of time in Atlanta. So yeah, we're talking.
Yeah,
so
right.
I talk to Bill Mick down in Melbourne, Florida. I do that every Tuesday. That's a radio show that then gets turned into a podcast. I do a weekend podcast that started primarily because the guy that I co-hosted with wanted to learn how to do radio. And so I was teaching him, and we just started doing the podcast, and that continued for almost 6 years now. And that's just that. The joke in that, it's called What the Frock, whatthefrock.org, FROK, sorry. The joke there is that he's an ordained pastor through the Universal Life Church, that online thing. And they also made him a friar. So he's Friar Rod. So I went and did the same thing. I got ordained through the same thing. I got my rabbi's certificate. So I'm Rabbi Dave and Friar Rod. And we just kind of look at the absurdities of that sort of thing and go through there. Those are pretty easy. Whatthefrock.org, DaveDoesHistory.org. I've retired my regular show, the Dave Bowman Show. I with everything I do for Dave Does History, which is a daily podcast, it just takes up too much time. And then also very involved with subvets, the Bremerton base of subvets, GertrudeCheck.org, and BremertonBaseHistorian.org. You can I'm writing pieces for history for that 4 to 5 times a week. But all of that keeps me really busy, Bill.
No, that's great. And I know your son, how old is he now?
He is 14.
No way.
Almost 50. He'll be 15 next month. And he's already talking about, he's got his eyes on my Subaru saying,
oh boy,
when do I get to learn to drive?
No. Yes. Something to be concerned about. Well, I really appreciate your time, Dave. It's always a pleasure catching up with you. And just to spend this time with you has been a real pleasure.
It's always good, Bill. I've enjoyed following you through the years, and I know you work just as hard as anybody else in this business.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I've been sticking it out. Yeah, I've been sticking it out for quite a few years now. So
you haven't made $1 million, though. That's the first thing. The first thing people ask me about podcast: how much money am I going to make? And I always look at them and say, none.
None. Yeah.
You're doing this because you love it, not because.
Yeah. No, I'm like you. I love reconnecting with folks or connecting with them for the first time. And I had a bunch of people reach out to me, so I got a bunch of episodes I want to get in the can. So thanks again, and we'll stay in contact for sure.
All right, man. We'll see you soon.
All right. Take care.